Hello and welcome everyone to this week's Industry Insights. I am your host as always, Leah Troscianecki. And no, you are not in the wrong place. If you are seeing the one and only Rickatron on your screen, it's not Thursday. You didn't set your clocks wrong. Your computer's not broken. We are doing a takeover. That's right, guys. Our shows Tuesday and Thursday, so today and Thursday, are going to be about the same topic. Normally, we don't do this. Normally, Rick, our community ends. We kind of talk about two different things. We've got the group of end users who are really power users of the Veeam platforms. They want to know the best tips and tricks. They want to chat with their community, share those war stories. And on my side of things, we love to talk about data, trends, all the fancy stuff. But this is really where the two worlds collide, because this week we are talking about the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And Rick, I know you know that topic all too well. We're going to talk about some of your very own war stories. So thank you so much for joining us on Industry Insights, Rick.
Happy to be here, Leah. Thank you so much. I think I've been on quite a while ago, but I'm just going to drop it here. This is not the first takeover we're going to be doing on the stream. So we have, of course, the Magic Quadrant is going to be a takeover on Thursday. I'm going to have Emily Tellez with that. And then end of the month, I got a big surprise.
Big surprise. So everyone stay tuned, because you guys know that we love to have fun here on this show. And the Tech Bytes crew absolutely knows how to have fun too. So I think this is going to be a great show for all of you guys. You really set the stage of all of that. I mentioned that we're going to be talking about the Gartner Magic Quadrant, but let's pull it back. We want to just get that community engagement in there because we know and love you guys so much. So let's go ahead and throw up our first poll question, which is all about magic. If you could master one magical skill instantly, which would you choose? Rick, I don't know about you, but I really debated my answer for this poll question. So I have friends all over the world. I'm very fortunate that most of my friends are not in Columbus, Ohio. I have friends in Seattle, Barcelona. I just had a friend move to Tokyo, and I'm really looking forward to visiting them someday. So I've debated. I think teleportation would be the most efficient magical skill, but let's be real. I love to show off. So I feel like flying might be my pick, even though obviously teleportation would be faster. There's still going to be some time-bound effort with flying, but I think flying would just be really fun. What do you think?
Well, I've had many dreams start out that way about flying, but I think when it comes to like a magical skill that I would want, I would go a little bit more practical. And I want to give a hat tip to Anders, the infotainer, who frequents many Veeam experiences. And, go ahead in the chats of the different socials. Let us know what would be your magical skill. I got a couple coming in. I got my phone right here. But the thought here is that I would go for that little trick he does where he puts a coin in someone's hand, and see if I can get it both of the hands here. And he has the person, the victim, move it from hand to hand to hand. Anders doesn't look. And all Anders has to do is read this person's body language and pick the hand that has the coin, and will, do things like, tell me, even if it's a lie, the coin is in this hand. Tell me, even if it's a lie, the coin is not in this hand. Anders always gets it. I was practicing that on my kids. I got it. I could see how my kids lied. It was actually a really good trick.
I think you're going to have to do that at shows now. So if you guys see Rick at any kind of industry event in the next year, you better bully him into doing that magic trick for you. And props if you can actually really stump him. It sounds like there's going to have to be some psychological warfare here. You're going to have to throw him off the scent. So make it challenging for him. I think that'll be fun, Rick.
I don't like touching too many people. I mean, I'm a friendly friend.
That's fair.
Hey,
that's fair. That's fair. Well, we'll have to come up with some sort of other coin operated magic trick, because I like the idea of this. Of anyone who's watched this show, let us know what you guys think. And again, let us know in the chat what your favorite magical skill that you would love to acquire would be. I want to say hi to Camille from Jamaica. Speaking of amazing places that I would love to fly to. I've never actually been to Jamaica. Rick, have you?
Of course, I've been to Jamaica many times.
I'm so jealous.
I've been, some resorts in Montego Bay, and then, the Dun River Falls for touristy stuff on that north side is fantastic. I was at the Blue Mountain Coffee, Gamil. That's fantastic. And then I've also been on via cruise ship a couple of
Yeah.
times, and no, Jamaica, fantastic. And Leah, near and dear friend of ours, the other big fancy Rick Johnson's from Jamaica.
Yes.
So,
Yes, he is.
yeah,
Mr. Rum himself.
yeah, got some Veemers as well. So, welcome, Camille.
Absolutely. And while I haven't been to Jamaica, I am a very big fan of St. Kitts and Nevis Islands. They are just magical. I had the privilege of going there not long after all the COVID restrictions were lifted, and I fell in love. I fell in love with those islands. I had one of my favorite days of my life on a catamaran, drinking rum, listening to wonderful island music all day. It was great.
Well, that's a place I've not yet been, Leah. I've been to over 50
Highly
countries, but
recommend.
not there.
Highly recommend. There was some really, really cool stuff. And Alexander Hamilton Museum is there because he's from there in some way, shape, or form. So pretty cool place. Thank you so much, Camille, for joining us. You can let us know in the chat too. If you're from anywhere cool that we really need to visit, let us know. Speaking of cool, I am currently in Chicago this week in the United States. And I'm going to just go ahead and apologize in advance. I'm probably going to mention a weather phenomenon called corn sweat, which is a really awful phenomenon where the humidity dramatically increases because corn apparently emits lots of moisture during certain seasons. So I am just dripping in sweat in this hotel room, and I cannot wait for it to be done. Okay, so let's go ahead and get down to business. Let us know still if you've got any good magic tricks here. But as a reminder, today we are talking about the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And Rick and I are going to be talking about this on both Industry Insights and Tech Bites because we think it's really two sides of the same coin. So Rickatron, why don't you go ahead and get us started and let's just talk a bit about what the Gartner Magic Quadrant is for those who may not know. The Gartner MQ is a framework that they use across many different categories. They recognize that there are many vendors in all these different categories. There's also categories that emerge every day. So they want to provide a framework to help organizations evaluate these vendors. There's a stat that I heard recently that says any given organization on average shares data with 580 vendors. 580 vendors. So it's got to be pretty hard to do a real evaluation of most vendors. So I think it's really interesting, Rick, to look at the way that Gartner approaches the backup and recovery category, especially since it's a pretty mature category. I mean, we have some people here on staff at Veeam who have been doing backup longer than I've been alive, which is a really fun thing that I love to bully people with, because I'm sure that is frightening, but it just shows the staying power of something like backup. So let us know in the chat too, how long any of you guys have been in the backup space for. If you guys have been backup admins for a long time, I want to hear about it. Are you 15 years in, 20 years in, 30 years in, etc. Let us know in the chat if we hear any more about that. And Jeff, thank you so much for geeking out about corn sweat. Please go Google it. And again, I'm probably going to say it a couple of times because I hate sweating. And it sounds like you're from Toronto. It's probably colder up there. I might come visit you just to escape this heat. So Rick, let's talk a bit about the Gartner Magic Quadrant for this year specifically. I know one of the things we're really proud of is that we have reached the highest ability to execute for the 6th consecutive time. And we are a leader for the 9th year in a row. So those are two really exciting accolades. Do you want to talk to us a bit about what we were excited this year?
Yeah. So first of all, it's really difficult in whatever perspective you are. If you're an analyst firm or even the journalist type perspective, but it's effectively a comparative. This is one of the most difficult things to do. There's a lot of interests in play. And when we look at something like the Gartner Magic Quadrant framework, right, this exists for several different products. There's enterprise storage, there's distributed cloud, public cloud, there's software as a service, collaboration platforms. I might have the names wrong, but just highlight that it's one of those assets that can exist in a technology ecosystem across the technology spectrum. So when I look specifically at the Gartner 2025 Magic Quadrant for backup and data protection platforms, new name, by the way, it's one of those things that, every year the criteria changes. Now, there's some things that are consistent through the years, things like, what geographies and like some revenue requirements, et cetera. But capabilities change, and we'll talk a little bit about that on the Thursday show. But this is really a very powerful way as a decision maker or as a practitioner, because there's a very important supplemental asset to this that really gives you a basis of the whole ecosystem. So I won't lie, I spent basically my whole month of March, along with Dave, which we'll hear from in a bit, working on this. But this is probably one of the best assets in the space.
It really is. And I think, we are super excited to participate in it, to have a lot to say about it. And Rick actually mentioned a good friend of ours, Dave Russell. He is an ex-Gartner analyst. In fact, he led this MQ for many, many years. And we were very privileged that he chose the Veeam team to come work for. And we learned so much from him and his leadership every single day. We'd be remiss talking about this if we didn't bring him in. But of course, Dave is pretty busy. So we went ahead and had a conversation with him last week about, how he thinks about the Gartner MQ and what he might want you all on the community side to know more about. So he actually did this really cool thing. If you have a Gartner license, or if anyone in your organization has a Gartner license, you can actually pull up any of these Magic Quadrants, whether it's ours or another one, and you can interact with the model itself. And why that is so exciting is Gartner has their very well-informed opinion of what goes into these requirements. But at the end of the day, you might disagree. You might want to lean in on certain things more than others. And as Rick said, every year changes. So I want to go ahead and pull a quick clip of our conversation with Dave, where he talked a bit about how a Gartner license holder can interact with the Magic Quadrant and choose their own adventure. So let's roll that clip.
One of the really neat things that you can do if you're a Gartner client is you can actually tee up what they call the interactive Magic Quadrant. That's what's displayed here. Here you can see the evaluation criteria over on the right-hand side. There's 6 of them on the ability to execute, or the y-axis, and on the vision axis or x-axis, there are 8 different criteria. So depending on what your interests are and where your priorities are as a company or your role in the company, you can really choose your own adventure and tailor this to what you want. So I'll give you an example of this. Let's say you're a risk-averse organization. And one of the things that you're really wanting to bet on now that we've had a lot of changes, right? There's been changes in hypervisor pricing. There's been changes in our market, companies acquiring other companies, some solutions, the future of them may not be entirely certain. So maybe you're concerned about this overall viability. Watch what happens as Gartner, who had this kind of a medium rated criteria, let's maximize that out. You can see it kind of turns orange there. And the orange dots represent what now is the result of this change. The gray dot represents where the position was originally. Now, this is a little counterintuitive, but hang with me and you'll get the idea. Veeam doesn't change. You can see some of the other vendors don't change. One of them does. It goes from where they were evaluated in gray to now going down if viability is increased. Now, here's the tricky part. Viability is increased as a criteria, but yet the vendor's evaluation declines, meaning in Gartner's evaluation, there were some concerns about overall viability on a specific vendor. Now, let's just play around with this. We can do a few of these. For example, if we want to, and I'm just going to kind of like randomly move some sliders here, we'll increase a few of these. Since we don't want to just increase everything, I'll actually decrease some of these. So now, depending on whatever mix of all of these criteria, if you want to adjust all of them, you absolutely can. But you can see now what the results are. I'm just playing with the x-axis or the vision axis. Again, this notion of gray is what the publication view looks like based upon Gartner's weighting of this criteria. And then the orange is where we ended up. So, I'll give you one last example, because let's do now the ability to execute and choose a few of these. I mentioned viability before. Maybe you care about marketing execution, because the two could be related. If a company markets well, they tend to sustain their sales, perhaps improving their viability. Again, if you're a risk-averse organization, or you're an organization that's kind of being forced now to change backup solutions because your previous solution's been acquired or is no longer being invested in. So again, the notion here is gray is what the original positioning was, orange is where things ended up. You can do any permutation of these that you want. So for example, we can hit, all of these axes and start seeing where things might end up. So the key thing here, you can have it your way, right? This is Burger King. Make sure that this model and this evaluation suits your needs, and you can do as many what-if analyses as you want to try to come up with different points of view that support what's most important for you and your company's goals going forward.
Well, hopefully you guys had a chance to enjoy what Dave had to say. You may not have heard what he had to say because you might have been admiring the guitars in his background. I know that's usually one of my biggest problems. So sorry I'm in a hotel room. I don't have some impressive background for you guys today. But, one of the things that I think is impressive is the way that Gartner is able to really boil down so much of what's going on in the category and not just rest on the laurels of what worked 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but also highlighting things that we really think the category needs to be aware of and pushing towards moving in the future. So it seems like a really difficult balance. And Rick, I know in a little bit, we'll talk a bit about how the sausage is made, so to speak, but let's anchor first on what this year's mandatory capabilities were from Gartner. Again, if you download the report yourself, and production, if we can make sure that the link to the Gartner Magic Quadrant is in the chat, you'll be able to access that report yourself, share it with colleagues. But at a high level, I think one of the things that's been really exciting is we used to see backup specifically as a data center function. And we would have to really think about how we convince organizations, not just backup admins, but organizations at large, on how important it is to back up other kinds of workloads, even if they're in high availability environments like hyperscale clouds, software as a service, et cetera. And part of that is because we're seeing the types of recovery requirements changing. It's not just some sort of human failure of some sort of accidental deletion. We're also seeing things like cyber attacks, of course, third-party outages. This week I'm with our U.S. Central team talking a bit about how we can better support our customers this year, given the trends of this year. And one of the big things I highlighted is third-party service provider risk, right? The idea that we are so dependent on so many different technologies that it's becoming really important that we are aware of the SLAs of these third parties we work with and how we ultimately stay resilient even if they go down. So if Microsoft has an outage, if AWS has an outage, if one of your software solutions has some sort of issue, how are you building redundancy and resiliency into your architecture? So we're starting to see a lot of that become more important in things like the Gartner MQ. Of course, we always are going to anchor in the best practices of recovery time and point objectives, compliance requirements, thinking about data lifecycle. We're also seeing the emergence of common controls like immutable storage. This week, again, I'm in Chicago, and I was just having a chat with our Vice President of Systems Engineering, Simon LeCompte, and he mentioned that he was just in a meeting with a major bank, and this is a brand that everyone would know, and asked them if they are storing their backups on immutable storage, how much of their data is stored in immutable storage, and the answer was 0. So we think these things are best practices, especially for you guys in the Veeam community who hear us talk about this stuff all the time, but Gartner is still seeing how important it is to highlight these very critical capabilities. So Rick, any kind of reactions of where we've seen this change from maybe from 10 years ago to now? Anything you were surprised to see?
Yeah, so I haven't been working on the Magic Quadrant as long as Dave, but I am in my 15th year here at Veeam, and I have been involved with every entry we've done. Couple of thoughts, and you look about, let's say, for example, when we talk about, say, like the anomaly detection, that's an area that I really think is a kind of a modern twist on really the value of where these types of solutions sit in the market. And I'd also go to that point that you made about the conversation with Simon. I mean, this immutable storage is a must have. There's absolutely no excuse for that today. Got to have one or more. Actually, I talked to a lot of folks with several. And if I put the Veeam lens on, it's easier than ever, whether we're talking about Veeam Vault, talking about the immutable file system we can write on Linux, or even the incredible options with our partners. There's over 60. So there's no excuse today for something like that to be a priority for decision makers today. And then I also want to talk a little bit about these two right here, the hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and software as a service. And that was actually something when I look at the report this year, it was actually pretty clear that SaaS and hybrid cloud, multi-cloud were a priority, and it matches the conversations I have with customers. It matches the shift that organizations are having in their IT practice. And I'd also say that I love this second one, recovery from failures, human error, cyber attack, disaster. This speaks right to the heart of anybody with either gray hair or no hair. I grew up preparing for things like fire, flood, and blood. Okay, that was what a disaster was when I started my career. But the reality is, and the data tells us, everything from the ransomware trends report to the headline news, is that the cyber attack or a ransomware incident is the disaster most organizations are likely to incur in their careers. In fact, I'd even go so far to say, see if I can get this right. It's not if versus when, it's how many times nowadays. Okay. And if we think about the 2025 ransomware trends report, it indicates that many organizations have multiple incidents here. But, I'm going to throw out one zinger. I'm going to do it on your show. I didn't get permission, Leah, but I'm going to do it. This one, immutable storage. Here's an important one that I think speaks really powerfully to the Veeam story. You and I are based in Central Ohio. Normally, you're, as you say, out in Chicago, but a lot of people don't know that here in Central Ohio, we have one of our tech support teams. And I talk to them all the time. Had a great check-in actually just last week with one of the tech support folks. And one of my favorite data points, Leah, is that if we have our customers putting their backups in an immutable target and they've managed their own encryption key well and correctly, we do not have a tech support case on record of someone unable to recover data in a ransomware attack. If you ask me, that's super powerful.
It really is powerful. And I think part of that comes from the fact that there are many ways to architect secure by design principles. But again, if we think about how many vendors any given organization works with, it just becomes really time consuming and complex to do things like day 2 operations, let alone day 0 operations. So I think that having turnkey solutions from vendors like Veeam, and certainly our VCSP partners out there in the community, we also have amazing alliance partnerships too, where they offer a lot of these turnkey solutions. The idea of sharing that responsibility and sharing those best practices with your partners, I think that becomes really essential in terms of figuring out how to achieve these best practices that we all think are essential for resilience. You can't do it alone. And I hope that all of you in the audience who, are OGs of the backup space. I know someone had mentioned that they have been a backup administrator since Zip, RDX, and early LTO tech.
Now, here's a trivia. Those on the stream, what does LTO stand for? You can't look it up. So I'll throw that out.
And I don't know the answer. So, but I'm also, I'm a gray hair, but not a lot of it. So I'm an in-betweener. But I think what's really essential here is that a lot of you guys who have been in the trenches for a long time, what we hear from you is that backup has been a basement priority. You may have felt like you were doing it alone, that you were the one screaming, hey, it's important that we prioritize this. And everyone else just assumes that you've got it. It doesn't need to be a priority. What's nice, at least, even though the forcing functions of it being this way are bad, what's nice is that now I think a lot of the organizations we talk to are realizing how important this is. And it's amazing how often time, money, people, resources can flood in when we're talking about the kind of risk that happens when you don't do things like immutable storage. But Rick, let's go ahead and talk a bit about some of the common capabilities that Gartner flagged for this year. So, we have mandatory capabilities that we think are essential, like immutable storage. But Gartner also flagged other common capabilities that they are seeing in the space. And what I like about a list like this is, if you are a power user of Veeam, or if you're trying to advocate for what to do next within your organization, this is a great list to look at, because this is where the category is going. So thinking about things like zero trust architecture. I mentioned earlier that, one of the kinds of outages that isn't, Rick, repeat that acronym again. It was like blood, something, something.
Fire, flood, and blood.
Fire, flood, and blood. So what goes outside of that would be something like a third-party outage. So one of my favorite stories to tell, because I am a Swiftie, is to absolutely dunk on Ticketmaster, because who doesn't hate Ticketmaster? They are a monopoly. Ticketmaster had a major data exfiltration issue. They had over 50,000 events have their tickets exfiltrated by a bad actor. And when they did a root cause analysis, they figured out that the vulnerability came from their partner, Snowflake, right? So one of the many tech partners that Ticketmaster uses in their tech stack. However, they tried to point the finger at Snowflake and say they are the ones that are liable. But we know that your data is your responsibility. So it comes down to Ticketmaster taking accountability. But here's the zinger. I have a zinger for you, Rick. Do you want to know what Ticketmaster did wrong such that they were the ones that were held liable?
Well, given that we didn't practice, and I'm thinking on my feet, I would say it would be an optional step that was omitted. That's just a guess.
That's a great guess. And what's scary is that it is an optional step. They didn't enable multi-factor authentication.
Wow, look at me. Seriously, I just guessed.
Right? Just guessed on that. But it is those common misconfigurations, those basic wizard-driven steps that get missed that can be your downfall. So taking a principle of zero trust architecture, and of course, vendors like us on the backup side, baking all of that in, smacking you in the face with it, becomes a really important way that we can provide more value to you as category leaders. So thinking about things, Rick, like, and I'm hopefully going to spoil something you talk about on Thursday, but if we think about something like the Veeam Trust Center, right? It's taking a look at lots of different best practices, like whether or not you have MFA turned on, and telling you that you don't. We all need someone to have our backs. And I think looking at where Gartner is taking this category and flagging the important areas, it's really critical. And Rick, again, not to preview too much for Thursday's show, but I think that in this common capabilities list, we see a lot of the Veeam DNA in here too, not just in our, upcoming releases, but sometimes for stuff we've had for years.
Yeah, a lot of it isn't new. A lot of it is very familiar to our audience. And, one thing that I like to zone into would be kind of in the middle with the zero trust, conversation. And for those of you keeping score at home here at Veeam, we focus a lot on, I called it ZTDR, so Zero Trust Data Resilience. And that's, a separation of the control and data planes, which we've built into here at Veeam. So we aligned all of this stuff really well. But you brought up Veeam Threat Center. I want to highlight that. That's a really good one, and especially with Veeam Data Platform in conjunction with the Security and Compliance Analyzer. We make these best practices right at the fingertips. And I talk to customers all the time, Leah, where I'm encouraging them to up their score or take a look in there and see what can you do to improve your resilience, your footprint, not just of the data you protect, but of the infrastructure you use to protect it. And I sum all that up with a good friend of ours phrase. I'm sure you've heard me say this one, Leah, but sometimes there's some work to get there. And to your earlier point, you can't always do it alone. But I would say that the juice is worth the squeeze. This is important. This is work that should be done. And you know what? Veeam's here to help. We've got an incredible user community. We've got professional services partners. We've got reseller partners, service providers. There's truly no excuse to not get this done right to the expectation of the business today.
That is an amazing point, and I want to put a pin on that point because I want to double click on that specifically. To do that, I want to roll another clip from our good friend Dave, because one of the other things he showed me last week is how when you move some of those sliders, you can clearly see the story of how Veeam moves around. And he has some commentary about, what things Gartner might have focused on, especially when it comes to execution, because what you're seeing here are the technical capabilities, and that matters. But there's a lot of vendors who future promise and don't deliver. There's a lot of vendors who, put things behind many different paywalls. So there's lots that goes into not only the vision, but the execution pieces of it. And you'll see Veeam and other vendors move around quite a bit. So let's go ahead and roll that clip so that everyone can see a bit about how Veeam might change depending on what you want to look at.
One of the things most people do is they just look at the public Magic Quadrant graphic, and understandably so. It's kind of the bellwether evaluation tool in the industry, or really in all of IT. But what you can do is manipulate these criteria and weightings to suit your needs. But you can also click on a link from Veeam and read the entire report, which is pages and pages and pages long. It details specifics not only on the market, but each vendor that might be in your consideration. So for Veeam, as a specific example, you can look in there and see that Gartner, in their write-up, their text that they describe each vendor with, they're highlighting Veeam's strengths of having a very strong market presence and worldwide in every single geography, our strong ransomware protection and cyber resilience capabilities. So for example, Veeam has the only inline AI-based malware detection capability. We also happen to have our only in-industry internal incident response team and capabilities, whereas others partner for that kind of capability. But one of the key ones I like to point out, especially as many organizations are still considering hypervisor changes or what the ramifications of perhaps increasing hypervisor bills are going to be, is they call out Veeam's data portability and the ability to move across different hypervisors, different clouds to Kubernetes as an example. So you can take a backup literally from version 1 of Veeam 18 years ago and translate that from, say, vSphere to AHV or Hyper-V or to Kubernetes or to the cloud of your choice and back. So it future-proofs you. But let's double-click a little bit on this. And as I do, I'm just going to point out some dates. What's interesting is this Magic Quadrant was published in July. It actually says May for the evaluation. And the reason all that becomes important is Gartner is evaluating solutions that were generally available in market at the end of first quarter of the calendar year or end of March. They were done with their evaluation in May. This comes out a few months later. So all of the updates that Veeam and other vendors, to be fair, are delivering to market aren't factored into this. So one of the things you should do is say, ask a vendor, what's changed since then? Veeam's been on a release tear, delivering new products and updated releases for every single one of our solutions. But let's, for example, go and look at some of these capabilities. And one of the things I really like to point out here is, again, mentioned one of the strengths from Gartner was our geographical presence. Well, let's increase that. And suddenly we start to see some of the vendors in the leaders quadrant, they start to change. They start to move backwards because they're not as strong in some regions. Veeam, as an example, to the contrary to that, starts to move over to the right a little bit. Some people, speaking of pricing, are pretty concerned about what that situation may be. If you're on the pricing team, you certainly are. But if you're an IT person, what good is the solution if your company can't afford to deploy it or deploy it broadly? So what I've done here is just maximized or increased the weighting of the sales strategy and the geographic strategy. And you can see Veeam actually moves further over to the right. And that's before we even take into account some of the product releases and new capabilities we delivered to market since March 31st of this year.
It's always such a pleasure to have Dave on the show, and hopefully you guys had a great time learning a bit more about how you can interact with those capabilities yourself. Again, if you have a Gartner license or someone in your org does, highly recommend taking a look at that, because ultimately this is about how you guys use the technology in this category, whether it's Veeam or any of our competitors. We're all here. Rising tide raises all ships, as they say. So one of the things we wanted to hear from you guys in the community is, what do you think are the most critical capabilities for the category? Do you agree, disagree with what you saw from Gartner's list, what Rick and I talked about? I want to call out, while we're hopefully having some folks let us know in the chat what they think. We heard from Jeff here. Would love to get Veeam's perspective of what needs to be backed up with AI. Yes, there is data, but there is so much more. And Rick, I mean, not to spoil things, but we've definitely talked a bit about how we might want to do AI as an industry insight show. So you might see that in the future. But and we might have an infographic that we're working on for that. So Jeff, hopefully we'll have something nice for you to look at soon. But just to kind of riff on that a little bit, I do think that we are seeing this concept of how AI can be used in all of its forms in data resilience. And then there's also conversations about backing up AI-driven data itself. And part of why I think that's so essential, and again, talking about this week with the US Central team, is just how much storage and power is exploding in terms of the needs of organizations that want to use AI. I actually just finished a book called Empire of AI by Karen Howe. She exposed the start of OpenAI, the company. And it was a very fascinating take on just how much power, water, all kinds of resources it takes to stand up an AI infrastructure and to manage all of the data that feeds into these large language models and other kinds of AI models. So it's rapidly evolving. It's extremely complicated. It's extremely expensive. There's data privacy constrictions. Rick, there's so many ways that we can take this kind of conversation. How might you want to tackle this idea of critical capabilities in AI for backup?
Jeff is on to something, and it's a very important part. And I'd say that one thing you kind of got really close to, Leah, but I think is the biggest oversight with AI. And it was actually in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And, the questions, we said yes to every single one of them because it's true. But I think there's an emerging area where organizations really need to think about protecting the AI infrastructure itself. So here's the thing. The moment your business is dependent on something, it should be protected. Vector databases, do you have LLMs that you've made? That becomes critical. And not to steal my thunder for the July 31 show that's coming up, but you also have to be aware that right now, today, I don't know if you've heard this quote, Leah, but the quote was, the AI you use today will be the worst AI you ever use.
Yep.
Right. So one step further is Generation Z, who's coming into the workforce literally as we speak, will be the first AI native generation. And so we got to think about that as well. And so I think it has to be, you have to think about protecting AI infrastructures, especially of private AI solutions.
Yep.
And if you think about the level of questions that the Magic Quadrant had for AI, it was not a category last year about protecting AI infrastructure. It was this year. And then throughout the questionnaire, you're able to say where AI can help, because if you think about the Veeam lens, there's Veeam intelligence, there's the AI powered threat detection, and then we showcased an incredible vision at Veeam on. But I think this is absolutely important when we go forward, because I'm getting on my own soapbox here, Leah, but I'll just say organizations don't know what they have data-wise.
They don't.
And the only practical way to sort that out is with AI.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what makes it scary to think about, losing any amount of what you've built with AI, because to your point, today's AI is the worst AI you will interact with, and you can't ever make a judgment on something anymore when it comes to AI, because 5 years from now, it could be completely different. But part of that is that it's all building on repetition. For those who haven't taken foundational AI training, one of the ways that I kind of for non-technical users explain the principles of AI is that it's all pattern recognition. Everything comes down to pattern recognition. So what they've figured out is that instead of thinking of AI as a logical, defensible structure, instead it's about recognizing that the human brain is not logical and defensible. There's all of these neural pathways that connect, and we make connections that don't defensively make sense, but given our human experience, they connect in our brains. So AI principles are the same way. And that means that if you lose all of the experience of that repetition, you can't recreate it. Right. I spend a lot of time in the Azure backup space, and we talk quite a bit about how important it is to back up the metadata within Azure platform as a service offerings, et cetera. That all is logical, defensible structures. If you lose something, if something goes down, you'll be able to recreate it. And Azure has blueprints and all sorts of ways that you can stand up those kinds of infrastructures. But when it comes to AI, it's all building on itself. It's all learning from those experiences. So I'm with Rick. I'm really excited to see how fast people realize that backing up these AI models is essential, because if you don't, you could be losing years potentially of intellectual property and experience that the machine learning underneath of it has figured out. And you won't be able to recreate it fast. You're going to have to start from square one. And oh, by the way, it won't repeat the same way. If you go back in time as a human and live your life differently, you're going to be a different person. That's how all of this stuff is thought about and works at an intellectual level. So, Rick, I'm with you. I think this is going to be a really exciting set of requirements that industry leaders like Gartner are going to have to keep their eye on. And I think the Gartner MQ a year from now is going to look pretty different. I'm excited to see how. So,
yeah. And again, you can't underestimate that, corporate citizens are going to be dependent on these services. So if they don't have it, Can they do their job? That's a big question.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, if you have more insights like that, please drop it in the chat. We would love to hear from you guys what you think. But let's go ahead and move forward a bit and talk more about the Gartner Magic Quadrant, specifically how Veeam really thinks of ourselves as a leader in this space. Obviously, we've got lots of smart people who are so humble, obviously. So in our not humble opinion, this is a lot of what makes Veeam great. And Rick, on Thursday's show, we're definitely going to talk more about this with Emily. So why don't you just give us a quick sneak peek at what people might hear about on Thursday?
Well, Emily and I are going to really riff down and talk about our perspective on some of the strengths, the 3 strengths that are out there, which, summarized partly right here. We're going to talk a little bit about the how that happens, and knowing Emily, she's going to sneak in all of her good security stuff, right, that she's been working on. So I expect a lot of chat there. We're also going to talk quite a bit. Honestly, we're going to go contrary. We're going to talk about some of the cautions. And I actually highly recommend that organizations read those cautions about Veeam, but also the whole space as well. What I love about the cautions, by the way, is that there is a really important takeaway that the ones that were there before are not there now. Okay, so that is the between the lines comment here, the insider baseball, is that when we have a roadmap and we disclose that to the analysts, even though the roadmap is not necessarily in scope for the Magic Quadrant, but what you want to see is change where you don't want to see the same caution year after year, because that must mean it's really, really something to be concerned about. But the migration, the portability, that's one thing we'll talk about, because I think some changes in the ecosystem have made that more important than ever. And Veeam was built kind of before that was cool, thinking about that. So we're going to talk about some of the strengths and as well the cautions when it comes to the capabilities in the Thursday show. Same time, same place, myself and Emily Tellez.
And part of why I think that's going to be super exciting is, Rick, you mentioned that you have 15 years of experience working on the Gartner MQ. So we don't need to flip the slide because it's just a cute little placeholder, but can you give us kind of a peek behind the curtain of how this all comes together, how a vendor responds. Because I think, a lot of what you're talking about here of cautions and how the cautions are different comes down to discernment, right? We want you all as an audience to practice discernment, knowing what you're looking at and making your own conclusions. So let us know, Rick, how the sausage is made, because I think that would be really helpful for everyone to understand.
Yeah, the simplest way to put it is the eligible vendors that are able to participate in the Magic Quadrant. And this, when I kind of jokingly, but not jokingly, said I spend my whole month of March working on this, we are then set forth a massive set of assessment. And it's not just, do you back up XYZ platform? It's, do you back up the platform? How? And then, do you back up the platform when it's used this way, and how? And then, what is your strategy around this? There's a lot of business decisions. I think there's a lot of comments around, or questions around, market strategy. There's things like headcount, percentage of people in certain roles, those types of things. I look at something like Veeam's answers there, and it actually is in itself, it's a massive discovery effort. Every time we go through it, I learn a lot about Veeam, which is kind of weird being here 15 years. But what I do think is interesting is over the years, you'll see areas grow, like headcount of R&D is biggest it's ever been, tech support, biggest it's ever been, sales is growing and scaling as well. So the business side of the assessment is important as well. But I spend most of my contributions on the critical capabilities. And I got to give a hat tip to my team. I leverage the Veeam product strategy technologist team. I leverage them more than I ever have. It's just simply so much. There's new categories, namely the AI, which was an entirely new line of questions. And then also, the best thing I can ever do as a people manager is bring my team up and develop them. So I had Emily, Landra, Corinne, Kirsten, Brad, Edwin, myself. If I'm forgetting Jeff Riker, if I'm forgetting someone, I'm sorry, but we shared the love, but it was a massive team effort. Also, Billy, Matt Crape, Spencer, on your side, the team helped as well. And Pierre, I'll never get off the stage, except in this Emmy, right? But the thought here is that it's a massive team effort. And I think it's fair to say, at least the way Veeam treats it, there is nothing else more important, for certain responsibilities at this time than to giving the absolute best response and best effort as possible to this inquiry.
Absolutely. Well, now I have FOMO because I didn't help this year, but I did help last year.
Well,
One of the
I don't
things
know.
that we talked
There's one word I didn't call it. It's my favorite honor burden, emphasize burden. Okay. So I'm just going to say.
It's a lot of work. It is, but it does become a really nice forcing function to think about, what we as a Veeam team need to be focused on. I know last year, I helped a little bit with some of the industry vertical pieces. So how do we support healthcare, manufacturing, FinServe, et cetera? And I think part of what's different about that is that, we're seeing regulatory compliance requirements evolve, and that's proactively driving some of what is going on in the industry. So that's the kind of thing that is really nice about the Gartner MQ and working on it as a Veeam team, is that it forces us to really think about what the needs are, and we become an ecosystem of everyone chatting with each other. And speaking of chatting with each other, thank you guys so much for joining us on the community. We really appreciate it. And, Rick obviously joined us on our Industry Insight show partly because we really want to continue this conversation on Thursday. So if you guys haven't ever tuned into a Tech Bytes show, please tune in for Thursday. I think it'll be another really great conversation about how you can be thinking about what capabilities should get implemented, what kinds of discernment should you be practicing on those cautions. And hopefully that gives you talking points to make the case to your organizational leaders about data resilience. Because at the end of the day, we know you all on our community side, you are the warriors, you are the ones giving blood, sweat, and tears to keeping your businesses up and running. And we want to give you guys the ammunition that you need to make the case for improvements, investments, connecting with cybersecurity teams and other workload owners owners. So let us know how we can help with that. Hopefully the Gartner Magic Quadrant helps with that. And then hopefully this show, Tech Bites, gives you some of those talking points as well. So to wrap this up, Rick, thank you so much for joining me on this show. I'm really glad that you were here with us.
Oh, of course. I mean, I got to give all the thanks to Jeffrey and Felicia. They make us look so good, in spite of a relatively complicated production here with how we're rolling today. So, no, Leah, my pleasure. I'll be on your show anytime.
Absolutely. And I'll have you back on soon, I'm sure, maybe to talk about AI. So stay tuned, guys. Thank you all so much for joining us. See you on the next one.